Well, hello there, and welcome to my course called Finding the Window to Your Soul. And it is a conversation that you will be having with yourself, in essence, unlocking the way in which to connect with yourself and then in turn connect with God. And it's a way of unlearning or relearning or redefining this big concept that we call prayer. And what does prayer mean? And when are we doing it right? And how long are we supposed to be doing it? Just all those conversations that either embarrass us or make us feel shame because we feel like maybe we're not doing it right, or maybe God's not hearing us, or He's somehow upset with us. What I would like to do is take these next few sessions together and have a conversation about prayer, but also give you some tangible opportunities to start to redefine what prayer means. And so, if this is something that is interesting to you, I am so excited to have you come on the journey with me over the next hour and over a series of conversations through art, through video, through questions, and through some journaling. I really want to invite you into this idea of you can connect more deeply, not only with yourself, but with God. Because do you realize that God's highest desire for you is for you to be living your identity in a way that it's uniquely you, right? He's not trying to get us to have these marching orders where we're doing everything the same. Otherwise, we would not have uniqueness and identity and um, I don't know, this vibrancy that life really is supposed to have through the connection and community that we have with each other. And that's hindered anytime you have this gnawing inside of you that makes you think there's something about you that needs to be hidden or withheld in order to be a part of a conversation with God. Anytime you're doing that, what you're doing in essence is you're denying something that has been created within you. And how in the world can you connect with the source when you're withholding yourself? And so I am excited to go on this journey with you. And I hope that this is something that you find interesting and you are maybe even feeling the nudging of this is what I want to try and do. I'm going to do a series on this. And so this is series one, part one in the series. So I will let you think about that, contemplate whether this is your right next step. And I truly hope to see you in the classroom. Hello, and welcome to the intro to this course on conversations with prayer, connecting with the window to your soul, and also unlearning and relearning this idea about what it means to pray. So I wanted to start with an essay from a book titled Spiritual Direction by Henry Nouwen. And he refers to a story that you may have heard before about Michelangelo and how he would approach his sculptures. This is also down in your resources, so if you'd like to read along with me as we go along, I invite you to do that. Otherwise, you can just sit in kind of a contemplated posture as we begin this process of unlearning prayer. The tale often told about Michelangelo forming a statue speaks of how spiritual formation takes place in the heart. There was once a sculptor who worked hard with hammer and chisel on a large block of marble. A little child who was watching him saw nothing more than large and small pieces of stone falling away left and right. He had no idea what was happening. But when the boy returned to the studio a few weeks later, he saw, to his surprise, a large, powerful lion sitting in the place where the marble had stood. With great excitement, the boy ran to the sculptor and said, "Sir, tell me, how did you know there was a lion in the marble?" The boy's question to the sculptor is a real one, perhaps the most important question of all. The answer is, I knew there was a lion in the marble because before I saw the lion in the marble, I saw him in my heart. The secret is that it was the lion in my heart that recognized the lion in the marble. The art of sculpture is, first of all, the art of seeing, and discipline is the way to make visible what has been seen. And so when we talk about this idea of how we connect with that window to the soul and how we use prayer as a way of connecting not only with God, but also with ourselves, you must know, or at least consider the fact that there has to be a bit of discomfort to it. Because as you sit down and you agree to connect with your true self, you really are going against the norm of society. Because so much of society calls us to divert our attention or to numb ourselves or to just keep the noise going. Because if you keep the noise going, you never have to fully contend with the loneliness, the heartbreak, the disappointment, the silence, right? And so as we continue into this conversation of how we redo and re-examine prayer as a practice that actually connects us more deeply with ourselves and actually gives us a more meaningful quality of life, we have to recognize that there is a bit of discipline to it. So listen to this. There's a couple of different things that we're thinking about here. First of all, this idea of prayerful listening. Living a spiritual life is far from easy. Marble doesn't give away easily, and neither does the human spirit quickly conform to God's design. Being formed in God's likeness involves the struggle to move from absurd living to obedient listening. Let me say that again. Being formed in God's likeness involves the struggle to move from absurd living to obedient listening. The word absurd involves the word sardis, which means deaf. Absurd living is a way of life in which we remain deaf to the voice that speaks to us in our silence. The many activities in which we are involved, the many concerns that keep us preoccupied, and the many sounds that surround us make it very hard for us to hear the sheer silence through which God's presence is made known. It seems that the busy, noisy world conspires against our hearing that voice and tries to make us absolutely deaf. It is therefore not surprising that we often wonder, in the midst of our very occupied and preoccupied lives, if anything is truly happening. Isn't that interesting? That the busyness of life, which again feels, I don't know, you feel very valued. That might be the word I would say. Valued, needed. And so if we're not careful, our identity starts to be wrapped around this idea of how many people need us, right? Which is all well and good, except we know that at the end of the day, when we're alone with ourselves, that needing, being needed by others, takes a toll, right? It comes as a cost, and the cost is, well, you can need me, but I also need to be appreciated. And so what happens is love then becomes very transactional, and life becomes very transactional. But what if, instead of the value not being found in being needed, but instead comes from, how should we say it? I don't want to be cliche about it, but that idea of like the filling of the bucket, or our own well already having water in it, and from there that's where you draw. I mean, those are pictures of it, but you understand it when you feel it, right? This sense of I'm giving, but it's not from this place of expectation, and it's not from this place of if someone's not needing me at this moment, my life is empty, right? It's a different place that you come from. And so I think that's the thing more than anything that I have found to be of value, and why I use creativity so much in my work, is because I really do understand that you start to recognize that something is a bit off, but you might not have language for it yet. And because prayer many times is so driven by the words that you're speaking, that it becomes that if you can't find the word, you feel like you're not being understood. And things like creativity, like poetry, those arts, if you will, really give you a paradigm shift to help you understand, oh, you really are being understood, not only by yourself being understood internally, but also by God, that God sees it, God understands it. God gave this language, which is art, creativity, poetry, the arts in general, to be able to express that to Him, but as well to yourself. So, as we go into this next segment, we're going to begin to add that component of creativity to this process. And just check the resources to get all that you need to prepare for this next activity. And I'll see you there. I want to talk about two other dynamics about prayer and things that might enhance the prayer, the way in which you pray, and might hinder the way in which you pray. So let's start with what might hinder it first. And this again is from the book by Henry Nouwen called Spiritual Direction. It's called Active Resistance to Listening. Developing ears to hear, in terms of ears to hear God, takes time. We all have strong resistances to listening. First of all, we find it very hard to create empty spaces in our lives and to give up our occupations and preoccupations, even for a little while. We suffer from a fear of the empty space. We are so concerned with being useful, effective, and in control that a useless, ineffective, and uncontrollable moment scares us and drives us right back to the security of having something valuable to do. But an even stronger fear, even stronger than our fear of the empty space, is our fear of actually hearing the voice of God. And although we are unsatisfied and unfulfilled, we are not so sure that we want to go in the direction that God might call us to go. We are not sure our self-image is the same as the image God wishes to form in us. Those who have really listened to God's voice have often found themselves being called away from familiar and relatively comfortable places to places where they would not go. Resistance in the form of preoccupation and distraction often prevents us from seeing the truth of our lives, hearing God's voice, and living a spiritual life. To listen with the obedience to the voice of God requires building up resistance to all other voices that compete with our attention. So let's talk about that a little bit. I cannot stress enough, and you understand this as well. There are so many good things competing for our life. And especially the things that we can put on a resume or we can share in conversation with our friends. My goodness, it's so tempting to just accumulate those accolades, those, what do they call it? Those receipts, so that we can kind of have this altar of approval that we can even put before ourselves, in spite of some sort of emptiness we might be feeling. And so that resistance to listening, the whole world supports that. Wouldn't you agree? And so I would invite you, even as we continue to go through these sessions together, to maybe take some time to journal about that, the ways in which you might be experiencing resistance, and also the ways in which your life supports you resisting the ability to listen, right? To take time away, like that's going to cost someone else potentially if you decide to pull back and um, and listen, right? So there's the obstacle. Let's talk about the other side of it, which is growing attentiveness. So growing in faith requires a growing attentiveness to perceive where God is active and to where we are being led. So one of the key questions in overcoming spiritual deafness and blindness is, where is God active in my life or community right now? There is a real tendency to think of the spiritual life as a life that will begin when we have certain feelings, think certain thoughts, or gain certain insights. The problem, however, is not how to make spiritual life happen, but to see where it is actually happening. We work on the premise that God acts in this world and in the lives of individuals and communities, and God is doing something right now. The chipping away and sculpting is taking place whether we are aware of it or not. Our task is to recognize that indeed it is God who is acting, and we are involved already in the spiritual life. So again, that flies in the face of this needing to have activity in order to connect with God, right? Because if you really believe that God is at work all around us, right? If you believe that, so that's a premise you kind of have to start with. Do you believe that God is at work all around us? And if you do believe that, then it needs to have some silence, some awareness of where it is He's actually working, right? This is why I say this. If you've ever been in any kind of church setting before, right? So I'm not assuming that you have, because you may or may not. Spirituality doesn't necessarily have to do with the church building and the functions of a church. But if you are in a church setting, or if you've been in any time in your life, you know there's always a list of places where volunteers are desperately needed. And so I'm not saying that that is not wonderful work, because it is. But when you just compartmentalize God working just in that church building with those people that go into that church building, what you're missing is, again, a more vibrant way of experiencing God in your life through you out here in the world, right? So it's not your pastor or your minister or your reverend or your bishop. It's not those people, because you're very uniquely in a particular family, in a particular set of responsibilities if you have children, at a particular workplace. Even when you're at a restaurant and you're ordering food, you in the midst of all the places you find yourself throughout a day, throughout a week, God is actively working. And it actually really isn't that hard to figure out where he's working, right? And so when you take time, like you are doing right now, to take these few moments, what we might call meditation, through the use of creative acts, you are opening up that window a little more to be able to see. And don't we all want to see a little bit more? All right, I will see you again in the next session. Well, hello there, and welcome to our first exercise called the word collage. And so the materials you need for this practice is a piece of construction paper of whatever color you'd like to try. I've used a lighter color one so you can see it on the screen as I'm working in real time with you. And then either some markers or crayons. I actually have some oil pastels that I'm going to use because it just has a richer texture. So again, you can see what I'm doing as we're working together in real time, because I really want to show in the way that I'm engaging the exercise, just has kind of a way for you to see one way it can be engaged. But as always, when I'm doing spiritual direction and creativity practices that have to do with connecting with yourself as well as with God, I am always very in service to what the Spirit might be showing you to do. Okay, so this is the way I'm going to approach it, and I will even tell you if, as I experience, maybe some way I'm going to deviate from what the traditional practice might be for this type of exercise. So the only thing I would say is that as you're creating, please make sure and choose one color that you're going to use at the end. And I would even say if you have some sort of a pen or a marker, because you'll be writing notes afterwards onto your collage. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started. If you aren't in a place that you can kind of sit quietly with what it is that you're going to be working on, please find that place now. Go ahead and pause me and then come back on. I'm going to read a little bit as we go into this practice, and then we will begin together. And again, you go ahead and move into it as you are ready. All right, if this feels comfortable for you, I would like you to close your eyes. And start to breathe, and breathe deeply, starting from deep within your abdomen and breathing up into your chest, all the way up to your collarbone. See if you can lengthen your breathing so that your inhalation and exhalation are equal, pausing between them for just a few seconds. Now try breathing this way 4 or 5 times, and then let your breath return to normal. So let's do that together. Now, as you start to bring your breath back to your normal pace, ask God to bless this time and help you be more willing to give yourself over to the Creator. Using your own words, And I want you to begin to meditate on this question. What interferes with my relationship with God? What interferes with my relationship with God? Now, as the thoughts begin to materialize, I want you to start to take your markers or your crayons and write down words or phrases that come to mind. I will do the same. And you can choose to use any colors or as many colors as you like. So again, what is interfering with your relationship with God? Now remember, as you're doing this, allow yourself to really be as free flowing as they come. So there's no right or wrong words. There's no words that you don't want to use because you feel like somehow you are, I don't know, not using the words properly, or these are the things that you should not say. So as I wrote here, I wrote disappointment, trying to create a family. Church leaders lied to me, seeing that things are not as I thought they would be. And so, again, continue on with this practice. And if you show anger or you're experiencing anger, and if you have strong words, just continue to know and trust that God does want you to be honest. Because, again, we're going back to it's in there. It is hindering relationship. It's hindering relationship with yourself because you're not even being true to yourself. You're going through the motions, friend, and you know it. And this is part of our way in which we're going to really get at that using this exercise and others in this course. So you can turn your page around, you can write upside down, you could write it in code if you're afraid someone's going to see what it is that you've written. You could turn them into flowers or something like that, something that's meaningful to you. And it can be as creative as you want it to be. But again, this is not about making a pretty piece of art. This is about getting at the things that have hindered you in your relationship with God. So I'm going to give you another minute or so, or you can also pause if you find that there's more coming and you might even want to add another piece of paper. All right, so if you need more time, you can go ahead and pause this video. And if you're ready to move on, I want you to look at what it is that you've written. And I want you to ask this question. Are there any themes to the words and the phrases that you've put on your paper? Are there any themes? Do the themes spur you to consider other thoughts? And if so, write those down. And you can choose to write those in another color if you'd like. Now, I want you to take a minute or two and just live with what you wrote without judging it. Maybe even saying the phrases and the words to yourself. Seeing that things are not as I thought they would be. Trying to create family. Does he even like me? Why have I continued on this path? Disappointment. Church leaders lied to me. Now, I want you to take the marker that you've reserved, whether it be a marker or a pen. I'm going to be using a Sharpie. And I want you to write down what comes to mind when you consider God's response to what you've written. And I want you to be creative. Let God's response be woven into your words, upside down, diagonally, writing around the responses. And then even if you want to start to sense that there is some doodling you'd like to do, notice how God would like to be represented in your doodles. So let's take a few minutes with this. Responses to what I have written. Response from God to what I have written. So for does he even like me? I'm writing, you know the answer to that. Oh, this is not working. I love you so. And I'm just floating around it, almost like one of those flowers that you can blow away, the dandelion type flowers, trying to create family. Is that what you needed from me? Do you know I can do that for you? Okay, so you're just going through each and every one of these. And again, I don't want you to feel pressured by a time constraint, but going around and just writing these thoughts. I am with you. Now you see. I am near. I have always been with you. And whatever responses you feel once you write those down, just take a moment and let those thoughts really penetrate your heart. Disappointment. I know that so much has been disappointing. You really tried to make a legacy. I am here. All right, let's take another moment or two with this. And when you're finished receiving the messages from God, the responses that are being spoken to your heart, I want you to look at your collage again. How does it make you feel? And it might be a bit overwhelming at first. And I want you to know you can do this exercise several times and create a book with it. Because if this is something that for the first time you're engaging with, how I experience when I'm starting to what we might call unravel is you get the first layer. And then if you really want to maybe take one of these in particular and write it on a piece of paper, and again, experience the question again and see what comes up. And see if you're creating a pattern of awareness that's suddenly coming to the forefront. I invite you to not be afraid of the process of this. And as you move into this, I always encourage that if you're finding something that this might be time to go and perhaps see a counselor or get some professional help, I encourage you to do that. Because this is the beginning of a new life and a new way of thinking about God and a new way of understanding. And finally, finding you. All right, so here's a segment that I'd like to call Soul Questions. And so you will find these questions down in your resources, but I also would like to have you and encourage you to have a conversation in your journal. Just a side note, either on the back of what it is you've created or just in a separate journal that maybe you'll attach to the back of it later, however you want to do that. But here's some questions I'd like you to keep it at the forefront of your mind. And you can decide whether or not to answer one or all of these questions, just depending on just which questions resonate with you. Okay. So the first question is, was it easier to identify your feelings than to tell God how you felt? Let me say that again. Was it easier to identify your feelings than to tell God how you felt? And then why or why not? Let me give you an example. So, one of the professions that I've had in the past is I have been a teacher, a kindergarten teacher. And you know how there are times that things would not go very well, and you'd bring the two students together, and the student will want to tell you, how, something that's, Sally did was not very, very kind or whatever. And so then you would say, well, tell Sally that. And then suddenly there'd be this shyness about it, right? Because to actually engage the source has a different energy to it. And when you notice that energy, what is that energy about? So is it an energy that has to do with you don't think that he or she wants to hear it? Or does it somehow fill you with shame that you think um, you shouldn't have those feelings? Or are you afraid that there's some sort of retaliation that's supposed to happen? So there's just a little bit of an example of what I mean by sharing and identify your feeling versus turning it as a prayerful conversation with God. Because again, I mean, at its simplest foundation, prayer is conversation with God. So if you're not able to have that conversation, it is worth exploring. And then let's talk about what feelings you experienced when you were going through the process of creating that word collage. So, again, taking some time to write on that. Were there any surprises that came your way? And then ultimately, what did you learn about your relationship with God? So I will, in the resources, write all of these questions so that you can either print them off and just write your answers on there and then attach it wherever you want to attach it, or you can write it in your own handwriting and do that same thing. So it's up to you how you want to do it. But just allow some time, either throughout the day after you've finished your collage, or if you have some initial thoughts that maybe you want to come back to later, just jot down some thoughts and then come back later to it. All right.